Ken, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Dustin. I'm excited to have our conversation today.
So before we jump into some of the topics that we want to discuss, could you please just give a brief introduction of who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure, no, I'd be happy to, and thanks for the invitation to join your show today. My name is Ken Schmitt. I'm the CEO and founder of TurningPoint Executive Search here in San Diego. Today actually happens to be the 17th anniversary of our company being launched, and I'm very proud of that through some very crazy times, ups and downs, and sideways as well. But yeah, I've been in recruiting now for 28 years. We have a national search practice, which covers a lot of different industries, primarily middle market companies. And I have an amazing team of 7 people that are spread throughout the U.S. as well. And without that team, I would not be here today anywhere near the capacity that I am. So it's great to have such a wonderful group of people to work with.
And so alongside of what you do with your business, with your day job, you are also a podcast host. You have your own
I am.
podcast. You are an author. You are a father. You are a husband. So there's a lot of other things that you have wrapped up into the who is Ken Schmitt.
Very
You
true. Very true.
you mentioned the 17 years. Congratulations. That's an amazing milestone.
Thank you.
And could you talk a little bit about your journey? But don't give away too much because we also want people to buy your book as well to get more of the context. But could you give a brief rundown on how you got to where you are?
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate you bringing up the book. Also, I think that's a really good kind of place to start because I for a long time have been taking a lot of notes and just journaling quite a bit almost every day about the trials and tribulations, the good and the bad of being a small business owner and having a small team. And my sister is also one of my employees, so being a family-owned business as well as a part of that. And so I wrote the book called The Practical Optimist in early 2023, so a year and a half ago, based on when we're recording this today. And that was really a goal of providing kind of support, insights, ideas to other small business owners. And that's really kind of been the philosophy of how I've run my business for the last 17 years. It's all about kind of connecting people, sharing insights, learning, and sharing all the learnings that I've had along the way. Again, the good and the bad. And doing it in a way that's going to be aligned with my values, with my morals, supporting my team as well, looking out for them first, kind of that servant leadership approach, if you will, as opposed to the command and control that was in place for so many years, for so many decades. So that's really kind of what it's all about, is as far as the business philosophy goes, is managing with my heart. I tend to be pretty transparent, and I share with my team. They know what's going on at all times, good times and bad times, which is great, because that allows them to be there to support me and bring up new ideas. And I shared a lot of that in my book also. And then, really the initial goal 17 years ago, as I think a lot of small business owners think about, is, I wanted to grow the business and have multiple offices and, 50, 60, 70, 100 employees across the country. That was the empire I was going to grow and develop. And I realized, pretty early on that really wasn't my strength, nor was it my desire to have to, give up my personal life to travel and build that team. So I've been very happy with our boutique approach and our boutique, structure of our firm with 7 employees, and we're still standing today. So it's treated as well.
So you mentioned a couple things there, the servant leadership and also having to pivot when there's times when you said you were thinking this and then you're like, maybe that. Can you talk about how you started to develop those skills?
Yeah, I wish I could say I had a magic formula or any kind of a formula or framework that I was starting. And I grew up in a family-run business household. My dad was a Jack in the Box franchisee in the fast food space. Started working at age 14 myself, and my mom was in real estate. So I really had a very strong kind of support structure and examples around me of what it was like to run a small business and the need to pivot and the expectation that things are going to change on a dime, many times not what you expect them to be. And so you have to be prepared for that. So I think I kind of took that, probably unconsciously, I took that framework and that experience with me into my own business. And, I really tried things based on what I thought, our clients, our customers needed. Rather than being a product looking for a customer, I wanted to, first of all, identify a gap that needed to be filled, kind of a challenge or an issue out there that somebody else was not already addressing, and then find a way to address it with a new approach, a new strategy, and kind of go with your gut a little bit. And we tried things along the way in different times of our history of our business. We've tried different things. Sometimes things worked, sometimes it didn't. But just not being afraid to try, and always being willing to look at something in a different way with a different perspective and say, hey, let's try this. No one else is doing it. Let's see how it goes. And let's give it enough time, 6 months or a year, to take hold. If it doesn't, we have to be willing to cut bait and move on. Even if it's my idea, I can't be so married to it that I try to dig my heels in. So that flexibility is really important.
So, over the evolution of your business, are there certain things that you do to keep that transparency, to keep those ideas flowing? Is there any strategy that you have as far as how you hold meetings, how you communicate with your team?
Yeah, so we've been, it's a great question. We've been 100% virtual since day one, long before COVID and the work from home, trend took place in 2020 and up to today. So we've always been that way. So one of the things that you have to do when you have a 100% virtual business, even though my team in the early going was all here in San Diego, now it's a little more spread out, but even with people being local, you've got to have a kind of a natural, but also a consistent cadence to your communication. So we, on a formal basis, we have once a week meeting where, the full team meets over Zoom for an hour or so to go over what's happening with the pipeline of business, the business overall and general operations, and then what's happening on delivery of our current projects. Once a month, we have an all staff meeting, which is a little bit broader. It's more focused around new strategies and what's happening in the marketplace and trends and those kinds of things. I continually send articles and updates to my team on a weekly basis as well. I call it my Friday update. Well, I will send an email to the full team and give them a sense of what's going on, how things are going financially, what's happening with new hires, with clients, those kinds of things. So I've kind of settled into a regular cadence in terms of how often I communicate, but it's that need and that expectation that the door is always open virtually, of course, but that I have to be the one as the leader to reach out to my team. It's not fair for me to just rely on them to get back to me. So I had that certain cadence, if you will, that seems to go quite smoothly.
One of the things that you just brought up is, seeing different trends, like what's going on and being able to communicate that to your team. In your experience and your 17 years, is there anything that you can talk to as far as like how today's climate compares to some of those other moments over the past couple decades?
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying it's a very interesting time to be in the people business, right? Like I said, I've been recruiting for 28 years, but I would say probably half of what happens out there is the same. It's not really going to change much in terms of people getting hired and companies expanding, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of change out there in terms of how it's happened and the differences between the tools that we all use for hiring and the tools that we use as leaders as well. Even for my small team of 7 people, the things that I do as a leader now, I have different tools that I can use at my disposal that I didn't have back then. But I think the fundamentals of how to lead, the fundamentals of how to hire and when to hire, that has stayed very, very similar. I think, there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 4 years. My youngest son just graduated from Indiana University. And, we spent a lot of time talking about, these last 4 years for all students out there, whether it was high school or college, these last 4 years, they've got to be in the top 2 or 3 for the most tumultuous 4-year period in the history of our country, right? You think about World War II, obviously those 4 years were the same kind of thing, but the last 4 years for young people in general has just been very, very stressful and very trying and very anxiety, ridden as well. And I think that is a big change, that transparency among the younger generations is much better than it's ever been. There was historically, there's been a lot of people that, it was very taboo to talk to your boss about mental health or how your family's doing or stress or things that you're up against in your personal life. You never were allowed to bring your personal life into the workplace. Fast forward to today, and that's the fabric of who everybody is. That's expected of you. We all talked a lot more about mental health because of COVID, and this generation, this Gen Z coming up now, they are much more comfortable talking about mental health, and they are not married to a paycheck, right? They are going to work for a company that that they feel aligned with, that they feel like they have the right, the same types of values, if you will, and goals in life. And if they're not feeling it, they're not staying, they're moving on.
Mhm.
So that's probably one of the biggest differences between, when I was started leading a company 17 years ago and where we are today.
Do you see in your seat that you sit, do you see certain people handling this better from a hiring standpoint than others? You don't have to say names, but are there certain qualities in certain companies that are handling this better? Are they doing something different in their approach?
That's a good question. I think, and I use the word transparency a lot. I realize I maybe overuse that, but I think transparency and communication, they seem so simple, but I see the leaders that don't do well are the ones that really ignore that, or they try to limit that, or really put such a huge filter on their quote unquote communication that it winds up being, just as bad as saying nothing. And I think, the leaders that are doing well, the ones that are thriving, the companies that are still attracting great people and that are growing their business, they are the ones that say, hey, here's the reality of what's happening out there. Here's what's happening with our business. Here's the good and the bad. Here's the challenges that we're up against, things that we got to figure out. And here's when we made a mistake. A lot of companies hired way too many people in 2021 and the first half of 22. Partly because nobody knew for sure whether or not the trends from COVID were going to kind of stick, and they're going to stay around for a long time. So they had to hire people to support that. But also, I think people got a little, kind of over their skis, as they say, a little ahead of themselves, and hired way too much. And so now here we are, 2 years later in mid 2024, and a lot of companies are having to backpedal a bit. So the leaders that are admitting those mistakes, whether it be because of hiring or financial commitments or whatever it might be, it's not easy to do. You have to obviously admit that you are the leader, but you didn't have the answer, right? Yeah, it's not easy for people to do. But I think those are the companies that are really thriving, and those are the leaders that are attracting the A players out there.
And as far as the current hiring trends, and I know, especially because I work in commercial real estate, or most of my time is spent in commercial real estate, it's not pretty out there at the time that we're recording this.
Yeah.
Are there certain industries that you see are doing better or faring better or bracing? Is there what do you see as far as different markets and different industries?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I wish I had a one blanket answer. It's it's a little all over the place. I mean, the whole term of rolling recession, which kind of took hold early last year in 2023, I think it's very, very true. And our industry is a great example of that. Like I said, 2021 companies hired like crazy. Every company under the sun in the recruiting world had a record year in 21. So that was very, very strong. And it really continued on in 22 for the most part also. It didn't really start to turn down until the middle of last year, and then really accelerated in Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year. So, in professional services, especially, and in recruiting, that's really kind of where that's gone. But then you had companies like manufacturing. They were hit hard in the early part of 2023, and then they've actually come back pretty strong here in 2024. So it really depends upon the industry and the sector. Each one's had its own kind of unique experience, if you will, with the ups and downs. Everybody suffered because of the supply chain issues in 21 and 22, where the cost of a container went up by 100, 200, 300% or more. Plus things were stuck at the docks. We all remember those photographs and videos of all the different container ships off the coast of Long Beach, just sitting there waiting for a chance to get in and get unloaded. So those were also kind of rolling issues out there. But I would say right now, the biggest, and this is a very overused term, but AI is really the most disruptive trend out there right now. Some good and some bad, certainly, and it'll continue that way. But I think that's the one activity, or the one kind of new tool, if you will, that is rolling through every industry and affecting every industry differently. So we'll see how that unfolds going forward.
Is there a sense of fear or panic, or what is the sense that you see from hiring managers or executives of AI and how it's impacting their business?
Yeah, well, actually, again, it goes back to communication. There's a great article in the most recent Harvard Business Review talking about AI, and talking most importantly about how leaders and managers communicate to their employee base what AI is, how they're going to use it, how it will or won't affect those frontline, jobs also. I think a big issue out there is that a lot of leaders are trying to lean into AI and use it however possible to become more efficient, streamline operations, do things more quickly, and to some extent to do it with fewer headcount. But there are jobs that'll be eliminated, but a lot more jobs in the long run that'll be created. The problem is that a lot of leaders are not sharing this, or their kind of their game plan, their strategy around AI. It's not being shared with those frontline employees. So left to their own devices, the frontline employees are going to come up with the worst possible scenario. We're all going to lose our jobs. We're going to be displaced by robots. We're not going to have any autonomy anymore. I'm going to have, the career that I spent my whole life building is now just, in the toilet, which is not, it's not true. It's not the case for everybody out there. There will definitely be some duplication, but there's also a lot of companies that are doing a great job of reskilling and upskilling their talent, their employees. AT&T is a great example of that, where they are trying to spending a good amount of money and time cross-training their employees into different parts of the organization, partly because of AI and partly because of the need of where the business is going. But those are the kinds of conversations and the kind of transparent leadership that is much more effective. And it just kind of eliminates or at least diminishes the over concern that a lot of employees have out there about AI. So it's good and bad depending upon where you sit.
With all the technology and the emerging technology and things that are happening, but I also know, and you stay abreast of all those things, you're aware of them, but I also know that you are a classic networker. Like you the communication and the really getting to know people on that personal level. You're one of the best that I've ever seen at
Thank you.
that. And I don't even feel like it's necessarily like a tactic. It's more of just who you are, which is really, it's very genuine. And I've seen it, how many different people that you've impacted their lives and who you communicate with. How do you see that in this whole new work dynamic? And again, you think you alluded to it a bit when you said you've always been remote as your company, but where does that lie in this whole landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, honestly, I think it's been easier to talk about it. And I think it's more well received these days because of the discussion around mental health, especially. And I think, actually, I have a chapter about it in my book. It's very lonely in a leadership position, whether you're the CEO of a company or just leading a small team or a whole department, no matter what it is. It's difficult, right? You don't have as many peers to talk to at the same level. You don't have someone that's totally objective that you can speak to. You can't lean on your team to ask them, hey, what direction should I take my team or my company? Because you're the leader, and so what you say, no matter how open you might be, what you say has a bigger impact, and so they may not be willing to push back as much. And so for me, networking has really helped to alleviate that loneliness. It's helped me to get a chance to hear what's happening in other organizations. It's given me a chance to see, kind of get exposed to best practices that other leaders employ that help them. It's also a chance to meet people that you can commiserate with and say, hey, you know what, this really sucks right now, or I'm really struggling, or I made a serious mistake here. Has that happened to you? How did you push through it? So networking is not just about getting out there to try to meet people for business development purposes. It's really truly about learning. And if you're a lifelong learner, and if you love reading, all those kind of things, face-to-face networking or virtual networking is just an extension of that in my experience. And it really has helped me. It's helped me to have a peer group of people to talk to. It's helped me to get a sense for, okay, so yeah, things are tough in my business, but it's also tough in these other businesses also. It helps to kind of normalize things also. And I think, I'm naturally, I like to be around people. If I had to be in my office behind a desk, 5 days a week, every single week, every single month, I would literally go crazy. I would lose my mind. So part of being an extrovert means that I get my energy from other people and being around them and learning from them and hearing their stories and those kinds of things. So I do that on a regular basis, and I get involved with groups, networking groups and trade associations that will feed me, that will help with my own personal and professional development in terms of the speakers, but also in terms of the other members. If I can learn from them, if I can connect and click with them, then in my view, it's a very good use of my time.
As a leader in your company, how do you communicate that to your staff, your employees, on how to find their way in that? And I say like, because you know that's
Yeah.
how you are, right? And you found that throughout. Is there anything that you recommend to other people? Like, this is how that I suggest that you might find your best mode of operation.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, it's going to sound very, very simple, but just ask them. I think a lot of employers, a lot of leaders assume one thing about their team. If you're a sales leader, you assume that everybody on your sales team is motivated by money. If you are an head of engineering or CIO, you assume that everybody on your team is motivated by being able to work on the most cutting edge projects. And that certainly might be true for some of your team, but I guarantee it's not true for your entire team. So the simple answer to your question is just ask them, talk to them. And a great kind of framework to use is reviews. We all have been in companies, big and small, where you had an annual performance review. You sat down with your boss. Your boss hated it. You hated it. You got very little value out of it, but it was mandated by HR or by the company leadership or just by tradition, honestly. Well, really, the companies that are more cutting edge, that are employing and retaining top players, are the ones that have done away with that. And rather than once a year sit down, performance review, talk about what you did right and wrong, it's more of what we call a career conversation. And it takes place once a month if possible, but at least once a quarter. If you have a larger team, once a quarter is more than appropriate. But just having a 15, 20-minute discussion with your each of your employees and saying, how are things going? Are we tracking to the things that you want to do? Are you feeling heard? Are you feeling acknowledged? What are some struggles that you had over the last 90 days? And you can say, and hopefully you as a leader are keeping track of what you're seeing your employees do. So you can then lead that conversation and say, hey, last month when you did this, when you helped out Sally on that project, I really want to commend you for that. That was fantastic. She really needed help. You stepped up. I know it's outside the scope of your responsibility, but I really appreciated that additional support that you provided to her. So having that ongoing career conversation, it allows you to, first of all, it's going to increase the likelihood of retaining those A performers, those top performers out there, because they know that you care about them. That's number one, and purely selfish means. But B, in terms of just being a good leader and a good, corporate citizen, it shows that you want to have that dialogue. You want to hear what's going on in their lives. You want to make sure that you're staying up to date on things that may have changed, because their priorities might change. Somebody who has a new baby today, that's their focus. But what if one of their parents gets sick and now they have to take care of their elderly parents and a newborn, which is happening a lot out there these days. So you never know what's going on until you actually sit down and talk to your employees. But that is the single best way to make sure that they are doing the job they feel that they should be doing, that they're able to really leverage their strengths and go with their expertise. And then you can find out ways to help them stretch and get to that new step, that new point in their career as well.
And again, it comes to the open conversations and being able to have those conversations. But that sounds amazing to have those career conversations. And are there multiple companies that that have done away with their annual reviews and do something more along these lines?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but I can't speak to any specific names that come
Yeah.
top of mind. But
Well, and that's
I would
okay.
say,
And for this conversation,
yeah,
you don't have to say
call anybody out. Yeah, right.
No. That's
But I will
fine.
tell you that I'll tell you that the HR executives that I talk to, which are again for middle market companies primarily, so less than $1 billion in most cases, many of them, I would say most, certainly a majority of them, are going this direction, are doing away with that. And that's a very big conversation piece in the HR and recruiting community right now, because, back in 2021, as we all remember, it was the Great Resignation. Everybody under the sun changed jobs and got, 20, 30, 40, 50% raises to go somewhere else. Fast forward to today in 2024, now it's about retention. What can companies do to retain their employees? And it's not just about money. Money is certainly, it's always one of the top 3 to 5 things on someone's list. But a lot of it is around, does my manager hear me? Do I feel like I'm being acknowledged? Do I have any good communication with my team and with my leaders as well? Those are the things that really drive someone's decision to either stay where they are or to take another job. So that's really going a long way. So the folks that I talk to in that middle market space, most of them are moving to that more, monthly or quarterly career conversation.
Hmm. So, first of all, I want to. That's a great answer. And is there anything else that you're seeing in the HR landscape, things that are trends that people are looking for, and maybe not necessarily, um, in that sense, but things that people are
Mhm.
really missing in their employees, like what they're looking for as far as skills or temperament, personality. Is there any macro trends that you see there?
Yeah, well, we could have a 3-hour conversation about the things that I see going on out there.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and also
yeah,
something
but
people want too much. They want so many different things. You're like,
yeah,
but yeah, if
exactly.
there's any
Yeah.
trends.
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say right now is that there's a big conversation around, this is going to sound silly, but where knowledge comes from.
Mm,
And I bring that up because, traditionally for the last 100 years, it was very specific and very obvious. Your knowledge came from your experience and your education. And your education was only valid if you have a 4-year degree from a traditional brick and mortar university. When I got into recruiting, I said 28 years ago, if you had a degree from National or University of Phoenix, you were a second class citizen, which I always thought was ridiculous, but that was the way it was back then. And if you change jobs more than every 8 to 10 years, you were considered a job hopper. Fast forward to today, and obviously online learning is very much in front of us, and there's nothing lesser than about that. But the question now becomes, do you need a degree at all? And what about all these, kind of 15, 17, 19, 20-year-olds that have been doing something on the side and learning how to do business, how to do whatever function they're in without any education, any formal education at all? They learn through YouTube. They learn through seeing their family. They learn from just starting their own business online, whatever it might be. So knowledge is still important. Where the knowledge comes from is now in question. And that also goes to, how many years of experience is the right number. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client come to me and say, hey, Ken, I want to hire a new VP of sales. I need a new chief operating officer. And I want somebody in their late 30s to early 40s. And we'll say, well, we're going to present you the best people, regardless of age and regardless of gender, ethnicity, all those things, of course. But then you start to see who are the people they choose to interview, and largely is the people in that age group. And companies have, for whatever reason, felt that somebody in their 60s, God forbid their 70s, but even their 60s, oh, they're too old, right? They can't adapt. They can't move as fast as we need them to move. They cost too much money, whatever it might be, which is all completely irrelevant and completely wrong in almost every case. There's a
mm.
lot of amazing folks out there that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s that bring an awful lot to the table, and they're not looking to climb the corporate ladder. They're not trying to get into that CEO position. And so back to your question. So one of the trends that we're seeing out there is trying to help educate companies and hiring managers around, their willingness to look at people that are quote unquote non-traditional, whether that means somebody without a degree, whether that's somebody from a different industry, whether it's somebody that's a little bit older, or someone that was out of the workforce for 5 years to raise their young kids. Now they want to come back in. Well, great. They still have a lot of skills that they can bring to the table. Don't dismiss them simply because they've been out of the workforce for 5 years. Then likewise, don't dismiss somebody because they're 65 years old. That's just ridiculous. There's a lot of great talent out there that companies can and should be tapping into in that quote unquote non-traditional category.
I wonder how much to tie that statement into where artificial intelligence comes into all this. I wonder how that all factors into how people are weeding through resumes and experiences and all those things. Because if they're using those tools to do that, and they don't have the right parameters, I just wonder. This is not really a question. I just wonder how that is all going to shape up and how that's going to factor into things.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in fact, you mentioned my podcast earlier. One of the things I do on my podcast every month is I do what I call my recruiter rant. And I will
Mm.
spend 5, 8 minutes, whatever, talking about something that just really kind of, gets my goat. And one of those recent topics is about that, is around, you have to make sure that if you're relying on AI to screen resumes, which is fine in and of itself, it's fine, but you've got to make sure that you're training that AI to understand how to read between the lines. And you also have to train your recruiters, which are usually the more junior recruiters, are the ones, internal recruiters are the ones that are screening resumes on behalf of their hiring managers. You've got to make sure that you are training those junior recruiters to understand, yes, I want this experience and this acronym, but this skill set might manifest in many different ways. It may
Hmm.
not be spelled out exactly this one way on the resume. And if you're only putting that parameter into your AI, and your AI is only screening for that very specific, word string, right? And it doesn't come up on someone's resume, then that resume will be missed and passed over. And it may be a fantastic candidate that's now, being ignored simply because the AI and the junior recruiter haven't been trained properly to understand how to read between the lines. So yes, that's one of my, like I said, one of my rants out there is the need to not rely so much on technology to make us more efficient that now we're literally missing out on great humans
Yeah.
because technology is telling us that human doesn't fit our parameters.
And so you referenced how people receive or how they gain knowledge. How do you get most of your knowledge? Is it through reading? Is it podcasts? Like, how do you feel like you learn best?
That's a great question. A lot of guessing. I would say, for me, I don't know. For me, I always, and again, this is the way I was raised. Also, I was always taught to look at both sides of any issue, any situation, and so I do that very deliberately. I'm the kind of person that will spend some time watching both CNN and Fox. I will read some things that are more socially liberal, but I also read the Wall Street Journal. And I don't agree with everything on either side. There are some things that I do and some things that I don't. But understanding the perspective of somebody else, I think, is really important, especially understanding the perspective of someone that you don't agree with. Everything is so polarized right now, and it's so easy to get into this echo chamber, whether you realize it or not. As we all know, every algorithm out there, from your news feed to music to what Netflix feeds you, it's all based on your preferences and how you've trained that algorithm. And so when it comes to opinions, same thing holds true. So I go to different networking events and I talk to different people that I may or may not agree with. I read different things. I listen to different podcasts also, and I try to absorb it all and not just believe that everybody, in my camp is right and everybody in the other camp is wrong. There is so much gray area and so much middle ground there that if you have conversations with people, that's when you truly learn what they're all about. So yeah, it's a long answer to your question, but it's a combination of things. I don't just rely on any one source for my information to learn and to better myself. I talk to my team. I talk to my peers. I'm part of a couple of different international groups. I talk to them overseas, kind of what are they seeing? What are the trends out there for them also? Folks like you, Dustin, and your background, your experience is different than mine. So I want to learn from that. So it's again, going back to what I said earlier, being kind of a student of life and a lifelong learner, you have to be constantly looking for new sources to get your information so that you're constantly kind of challenging, whatever your status quo kind of train of thought might be.
A couple of things that you've done recently, we talked about the book and the podcast. And are there any things that you can glean from those experiences, from going through that, and what that you found the most useful things that you pull from those experiences of how you've grown as a person and just what that whole process is like?
Yeah, definitely. So what comes to mind, this is going to sound kind of funny, but what comes to mind for me, especially with the book and with the podcast specifically, and even a couple of networking groups that I've started and run myself, is different ways to define success. Right. When you're a business leader, everybody says, well, success is clearly, revenue and profitability and growth. Well, that's true in some aspects, but not everywhere. When I started the podcast, of course, I had the same dream that every podcast host has. I'm going to get sponsors and advertisers, and we're going to get, gazillion, followers, and people are going to want to buy the podcast. It's going to be amazing. And then on day 5, you realize that's not going to happen. It's just not. So I had to redefine success. Same with my book. I had this, it was a small percentage of me that thought this, but it was still there. I'm like, I'm going to write this book and somehow it's going to go viral and someone's going to pick it up and it's going to be on Oprah or whatever it might be. And then again, you get into it a month later, you realize, okay, this is not going to happen. So redefining success has been the theme for me over the last 2 years, honestly, since writing the book and then, launching the podcast as well. And, when I had an executive coach for a long time, and I would talk to him and I'd say, Martin, I love doing the podcast. I really get a lot of value out of it. I meet some amazing people. I learn from my podcast guests as well. So it's very fulfilling, but we have like 150 listeners for every episode. Is it really worth it? And he said, well, how are you defining success? What are you looking to get out of it? Do you expect to monetize it? No. Do you expect to have, business come from it? Hopefully at some point, but that's not really why I'm doing it. He said, well, if it's fulfilling and it's a great, not distraction, but a great complement to the stuff that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, then keep doing it. As long as you're not taking away from your business activity, there's no reason to stop doing it. So that whole redefinition of what success looks like has been a really big theme for me lately.
And I couldn't concur more with that statement about the podcast, because
Yeah.
one of the things that I really love about this is that it's a focused, intentional conversation with people that, for the most part, like, I want to know more about, that I want to learn more, and to have this. And it's not necessarily, you're not in a group setting with a bunch of other people at a network event, but that has its own place.
Right.
It's not over a meal, so we're not worrying about all those type of dynamics and what else around. Like, we are focused, having a conversation. And one of the things that I learned so much from this, and I enjoy this so much, that it's just a bonus that other people will listen to it and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I
Right.
heard that conversation." So I love what you're saying there about redefining success, because I'm having so much fun doing this. And then I talk to other people that are saying, "Wow, I really like how you do your podcast. Like, can you help me do that?" And then I get to help, and it's aligned with everything else I'm doing. So
Right.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and that you are getting a sense of fulfillment out of what you're doing
Yeah.
with your podcast as well.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to turn 54 in a couple of weeks here, and I think it's so cliche, but you get into this point of your life, and again you redefine what success looks like. I always thought that if I wrote another book, it would be focused around kind of what is the one thing, what is the one word that you would use to describe yourself, or what do you hope to leave behind? And for me, really, it's not so much legacy as it is just support. If I can be a guidepost or an example or whatever you want to call it to other folks out there, to men, to fathers, to sons, to small business owners, to leaders of teams, whatever it is, and they say, hey, Ken, I saw this, Ken did this, let me give that a try. Or Ken did that and it didn't work, let me avoid that. If I can just have a small, tiny little impact in my small little world and circle, then that's very fulfilling. And that really defines success as I sit here now, running a business for 17 years at age 54. That for me is what success is all about today.
And one of the things that you realize of what that looks like from your lens looks different from somebody else's lens as well.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, you just named all those things. Like, you're an author, you're a host, you're a business owner, that you're a member of society, of your community, that's making a positive impact. Those are all great things. Those are all great things. And to see you do it and maneuver it, it's an inspiration to me. And actually, part of one of the reasons, one of the many reasons starting this podcast is being a guest on yours earlier on. And I was like, that was so much fun. I want to ride. I want to ride with a car like that, So it's
exactly right.
it's been a lot of fun. And so, thank you for being an inspiration to me, and, being such a good friend to me and my family. Yeah, you've been wonderful. So thank you so much.
So thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And it's great. We podcast hosts have to stick together. We learn from each other. So it's very helpful. I appreciate you sharing that as well. And like you said before, it is nice when you're out and about and someone says, hey, I heard your podcast. I like this. I want to do more of that. I'm thinking about starting my own. How did you do it? Those kinds of things. That really is, it makes you feel very good. So thank you. I appreciate that.
It's knowledge sharing, and everybody
Right.
has their own take or perspective on things. And, like, yeah, these are things that I'm interested in, I want to talk to people about. And it's a heck of a door opener too. Like, if there's somebody that I'm really interested in, I can reach out and say, hey, I want to know more, would you like to be a guest? And more times than not, they say yes. And it's a great door opener, it's a great conversation starter. And if I can use what I'm learning through going through this process, and how to publish it and how to edit it and all those things, if I can help somebody else, then that's icing on the cake.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's just you can go home at the end of the day smiling, knowing that you made a good contribution to the world, and you had some fun along the way also.
Yeah. So before we end the conversation, first of all, I want to say thank you. Is there anything else that you want to leave with the listeners? I will share all of your information, your podcast, your website, everything that you do. I'll put show notes. I'll put everything in there as well. But is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I honestly, the one thing that comes to mind is, after all this time running a business, I'm glad that I took the risks that I did. I'm glad that I tried new things that nobody else was doing, or that someone else did, but that they said you can't do this, Ken. You don't have the scale to do this. And I thought, well, watch me try. And not all of them worked, but I'm glad that I tried the things, because the things that did work and have stuck with us as a business have really become the foundation and really kind of the kind of the core of who we are as a team, as a business, and as an organization. So, I encourage your listeners to take risk, take a chance, and have a network around you, a peer group that you can bounce ideas off of. So you're not taking a risk, kind of in a vacuum in the dark and just closing your eyes and jumping into the darkness, that you have some people to bounce that off of. But risk taking, I think, is one of the most underrated aspects of leadership.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ken. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all your wisdom. And more than anything, I appreciate your friendship.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Dustin.